In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make an investment calculator just like this. And this is something that you can embed on your website. You can use it to collect leads, to just inform your customers, or even sell it as a product. And so what we're going to do, I'm going to show you how to make the underlying spreadsheet beneath it that you can either build in something like Google Sheets or directly inside of Grid. What we'll do as well is talk through how to set up these inputs, how to create sliders, how to make dynamic charts and tables. And I use grid sheets a ton in my business to present information to my clients in a way that's a lot easier for them to understand than trying to do the math all on their own. And it's also a lot nicer to use. For instance, I love using these sliders to present information to people versus trying to hand somebody a clunky Excel document or a Google Sheet that they may have difficulty using, and it's not as interactive and user-friendly. So with the grid, there's a lot of different things that you can do. There's a lot of different solutions that you have. We can create embedded calculators, pricing calculators, sales dashboards, the whole gamut here. And you can even do what is now known as a spreadsheet as a service, where you actually take your information, your knowledge, and then package it up into a spreadsheet, give it an interactive layer in Grid, and then be able to sell that as a service. That's what I do in my business. I help homebuyers make informed decisions about the loans that they get, and I sell that as a service through Grid. So let's jump into how to create this calculator so you can use it to improve your business, communicate information better, or even create an additional revenue source. All right, so we're first going to start with a blank grid document here. Now, I do already have data put in. Okay, if you don't already have this data, maybe you have data in like a Google Sheet or an Excel file. I went ahead and built mine inside of a grid sheet. And all the data for grid exists right here at the bottom, and we can just change the size of this if we need to. But you can see you can also add extra data sources here. So if I wanted to, I could add in a Google Sheet. Maybe you already have some sort of calculator built out in there. I went ahead and created a simple investment calculator right inside of Grid Sheets. So I don't have to go to another application. It's all right in one spot. Okay, so I'll show you really quickly some of the data that I put in for this investment calculator. Right here is just where I'm collecting the user inputs. So these are things like the starting amount, the investment length, rate of return, and the monthly contribution here. Over here on the right, this is just all the calculations for the monthly contributions and interest this investment would earn. And then over here, again, I have a monthly chart and an annual chart that we'll be using for the different charts and tables that we have. Okay, over here, I just have a quick overview of the starting amount, contributions, interest gained, and in balance based on how long the investment length is. And then I'll show you some logic that we can build inside of Grid. Okay, now we're not going to go into the weeds on how to build a spreadsheet. Likely you have your own spreadsheet that solves a very specific problem for people that you work with or for yourself. What we're going to talk about is how to add the interactive layer on top of your spreadsheet. So how do we take this data and make it easier for people to use so we can embed it on our website? So what I first want to do is create a way for users to enter their own information in here. I want to create inputs. So we can do this in a couple different ways. We can press the plus icon and look through here. We can do this for inputs. You can browse through and see what's in here. But what I like to use are the slash commands. And this is going to help you create your documents faster. By just typing slash, this menu comes up, and I can actually use this to search for different things inside of Grid. So what I want is a layout element. And this is what allows us to create a 2-column layout. If I wanted to make 3 columns, I could just press the plus icon here, but I just want 2 columns right now. So my goal is on the left-hand side, I'm going to have inputs. On the right-hand side, I'll have outputs, just for our very simple investment calculator. Okay. Now, something that I want to do really quickly is I want to add in a heading. So a quick way to do that is I can just press the pound symbol. All right. I think I'm going to make a heading 2. I'm just going to call this investment calculator. That way people know exactly what they're getting into before they start using it. So let's first start with an input. I'm going to type slash again and start typing input. So I want an input field. So once we have our input field, we then need to start assigning what cell is this affecting. So that's what the target cell is here. So for the target cell, I want it to be C2, $20,000. So this input field is going to directly affect that. Now we can also add a label to it so people know what are they actually changing, what are they changing the value of. So we can either type in, I can type starting amount, or if I want this field to be dynamic, I can just click the cell here. And this works exactly the same if our underlying spreadsheet was built in something like Google Sheets or Excel. It would be displayed right down here and work exactly the same. So we have our starting amount. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, we have a few options. I want to make our width large. That way they can put in larger amounts if they want to without it being cut off. Another thing that I want to do in our data options is I want to set some of the validation of this data. Now, you can obviously do things like this in Google Sheets or Microsoft Excel. And when you hand somebody a spreadsheet, it's going to have some data validation. But sometimes it can be frustrating for a lot of people when they keep getting a prompt saying they can't enter certain amounts. So what we want to do in Grid, and what makes Grid really nice with this interactive layer, is we can define exactly what values users are going to put into our spreadsheet. So for a minimum, I'm going to say 0. I don't want people to put in negative amounts. That wouldn't make sense for an investment calculator. For a maximum, I'm fine with it kind of being unlimited. I don't have a maximum that we need in this. And then for the step, this is when somebody clicks up here, what's the magnitude that this changes in scale? So if we don't do anything with it, Grid's going to auto suggest what the next step will be, the next value. And I'm fine with that in this instance because it's just a starting amount. We can go up to an unlimited amount, so that's perfectly fine with me. So next, I'm going to make a new line, and I want another input field. In this input field, I want the monthly contribution in this investment calculator. So our target cell, I'm going to select here for our contribution. I'm going to make the label monthly contribution. We're going to do the exact same thing we did with the other input field. We're going to make it a large width. Minimum, I want 0. Maximum, I'm fine with unlimited. And with the step, I'm fine with auto. Okay. Now let's make another line. This is what I really like about Grid is you have slider elements. If you hand somebody a Google Sheet, they always have to type in an exact number. And I know for my clients, what's really helpful is I want them to be able to explore information in a more creative way, in a more free way. And sliders allow your users to be able to explore data in a way that they normally can't inside of a spreadsheet. Because you want them to be able to play around with the numbers, see what happens. What happens if I change this? What happens if I change that? How do things change? And sliders really encourage people to play with your spreadsheet a little bit more and play with the data a little bit more. So we'll type / and go ahead and put in slider. And for our target cell, I want to do the investment length. Okay. Same thing. We're going to add a label investment length here. I also want this to be a large width. Now for our minimum, I want a minimum investment length of 1 year. 0 years would not make sense. So I don't want someone to be able to put that in here. Also, I only built this chart to do 30 years of investment. You obviously could build out something longer, but I'm just going to cap this at 30 because if they go beyond 30, it's going to max out the information we have in our spreadsheet, and then that creates a bad user experience. Okay. Now, what you'll notice is we can slide through here, but now we start getting decimals. So this is where step really comes in handy. I only want people to select 1 year increments in this calculator. So I'm just going to put in 1. And now their only option is 1 year increments here on the slider. A max of 30, a minimum of 1, which is exactly what we want. All right, I'll make a new line and I want another slider. And this one here is going to be the rate of return. Same thing, change the target cell. I add in the label. And then on our width, I want this to be large. And let's go ahead and set up some validation. So rate of return, I don't want it to be 0. I'm maybe going to say 1. Now, I can't just put in the number 1. This is a percentage, all right? So what I need to do is change this to a decimal, 0.01. And maybe I want the max rate of return to, let's say 20%, okay? And the reason here is, if you make your scale too large, that becomes unrealistic, it's difficult to use that slider. So for instance, if the maximum, let's say we put in 1, it becomes a lot more difficult for someone to select a realistic figure in here, right? They have to kind of really sit there with their mouse and scroll through because, above 20% isn't realistic for our investment calculator. So by setting the bounds to be more realistic to the inputs your users are going to have, makes it a lot easier for them to use your calculator. Also, it's really helpful for people to have increments that make sense, as opposed to just the slider being free to go to any decimal place at once. So in here, I want users to maybe be able to do 0.5%. Okay, maybe if that's too much, maybe it's 2.5. It really just depends what works for your users. I think 0.5% feels good on this calculator. Okay, so we can scroll through here. This looks really good for me. I think this would be really good for our users. And honestly, I might even drop this down to closer to 15%, right around there. Looks great. Okay, so now what we want to do is build our outputs. So the first thing I want is a table. And in our table, you can see I already created just a quick table inside of grid sheets, and I want to be able to display that on a table as an output. So I'm going to go ahead and select what data I want output. And then these rows here are going to be input as a row header. Okay. Now you could, if you wanted to, since this is a very small table, you could make the whole thing the data if you wanted to, and remove the row headers. It's really up to you on a table this small. However, when you get into larger tables that you want to display, it's easier to just make the numbers the data that's being shown, and then to add in these row headers here. Okay. If I had any column headers, I would add them in right here, but I don't. It's pretty self-explanatory. I don't need column headers for this specific table. All right. So the only thing I want to do here is I want to turn off alternating color. I don't like the look of that personally, but you absolutely can do that. If you wanted to as well, you could also make these sortable and searchable if you had a larger table. However, again, this is a super small table. We don't really need those features here. Next, what I want to do is I want to add in a chart. Okay, so there's several different chart options. I want just a basic line chart to be put in here. And maybe I'll remove that space. So what we want here is a little bit different than what you might see in something like Google Sheets or Excel, because we're going to use a formula to display a chart. And the reason we want to do that is because a user gets to put in the investment length here, right? And you can see it updates our table automatically, which is really nice. But we also want the chart to be able to expand and change during specific years. And the way we do that is through an offset formula. All right. So I'm going to scroll over here. This is the table that's going to display our data. So the way that, actually, let me just show you really quick. If I just put in the data of our chart here, and I scroll through all 30 years without my mouse freaking out, you can see it just looks strange, right? To a user, they see this data changing in a very weird way because the underlying data of it isn't really matching with what the investment is, okay? So what we're going to do instead is we're going to use the offset formula, and it guides us through exactly what we're putting in here. So first, I need to put in the reference. Now, instead of creating a range, we're just going to select the starting cell of our range. So it's going to be R4 right here, just the top left of our chart. So we added in our reference. Then you can offset the rows and columns. We're not going to offset. I just want this to be the true starting position here in the top left. Then what we can do is select the height and the width of this chart data. So for the height, it's going to be the investment length. So if I reference over here in our sheet, the investment length, now our chart is going to automatically grow and shrink depending on the investment length size. And then for the width, I want it to be as wide as our data, which is 3. Okay, so if I click off this for a second, now what ends up happening is if I move our slider, you can see that our chart data shrinks and grows with the investment length. This is a lot more user-friendly for people to be able to see this information and to be able to want to explore this data in a more interesting way than you really can in like other spreadsheet software. Now, there's one thing that we notice here when we went all the way down here. All of a sudden, when we went down to 3 years, the data kind of got a little bit strange. And this is because Grid is trying to understand exactly how you want to present this data. So what we can do is force it to look at the data exactly how we want to. So the way that we can do that is we can scroll down here to series orientation, and I want it to look at the columns only. You can see when it got down to just 3 years, it all of a sudden thought maybe we're looking at rows, and I want to force it to only look at columns. Okay, this makes a lot more sense as we scroll down, to 3 years. All right. Now, one thing I want to do really quickly is make sure that we have a legend. So I'm going to add in our legend data so people can look at this in an easier way. If you want to, you can change the color palette to something that maybe is on brand for you, or some colors that look a little bit better to you. You can add in a subtitle or footnotes if you want to. I don't think we need to. It's pretty self-explanatory in this very simple calculator. Now, there's one thing that I do want to adjust, and that is visibility. So you can see, 2 years, we can see, what happens with our investment. When we're just down to 1, there's not enough data points to show anything meaningful in this chart. And so it's kind of silly to have a chart in here when we only have 1 year worth of data. So what I'm going to do is change the visibility of this chart. So I can scroll down here to visibility, and visibility is something I can toggle on and off manually, or I can use a formula to change the visibility. So something I could do here is I could say, if, and then we come over here, if our investment length is, let's say, less than or equal to, actually, let's just make it easier. Let's say if it's greater than 1, then I want it to be true. Otherwise, false. So all this is saying here is if the investment length is 1, don't display the chart. If it's greater than 1, then display the chart. So if I look at our chart here, or if I look at our spreadsheet, if it's 1, the table or the chart is now hidden, which is exactly what we want. As soon as a user has the investment length as 2, it displays the chart, and then we can see it grows as the chart expands to a maximum of 30 years, which is how big our spreadsheet data is. So now this is a lot more user-friendly. The data validation makes sense. No one can break our spreadsheet, with the data that they put in here. No one can put in a negative value and it not make sense because it will switch back. Okay, so you can see how quick it is to be able to put, take your data, turn it into an interactive calculator that we can then put on our website. So let's say that with this calculator, you wanted a way to get more leads and to embed it on your website. So I'm going to show you how to do that with what's called a form submission. All right. So if we have our calculator here, what I'm going to do down here is I'm going to make another heading. I'm going to make a heading 3 by putting in 3 of the pound sign. And in here, I might say, let's see, get a custom investment plan. Enter your email to advisor of your investment goals, and we'll create a custom plan for you. Okay. So next, I'm going to add in another input field. Now the target cell here, I'm just going to put in this quick little email cell that I made here. Nothing special to it. The label, I'm going to say, enter your email. I'm going to go down to customize this and make the width extra large just to encompass some of those larger emails here. Okay. Now beneath this, I want a submit button. So same thing, I'm going to type / and find the submit button. Now, what we have to do is select an action. So when somebody clicks submit, what happens? So we can either have it send an email to us or send data to Zap. So I want to have it send an email. All right. So I can say submit. Maybe I say, maybe I want to make this submit and get your submit. Something like that. So you can customize that if you'd like to. Now, what I also want to do is change the visibility of this because I only want it to be visible if someone enters their email. Because right now, if this email here is empty, they still can click the button. And I want it to make it so that they can't click this button unless they put in their email. So to do that, what I'm going to do is make the visibility a formula. Pull up our spreadsheet here. And what I created over here was a quick formula that sees if the email field is filled out. Okay. So you can see the formula is just checking to see, hey, is this cell blank? And then show me the opposite of this so we can use it as our visibility. Okay. So it's false. So right now the visibility is false. As soon as I enter in text in here, like my email address, the email's filled out. So that checks to see, is this blank, and shows us the opposite, which is true. Okay. So now this button is visible. If we go back here, no text hides the submit button. And now if I put in my email address, our submit button is available. Now I want to do this one more time just to show maybe a confirmation text. That way users can see, hey, you submitted it successfully and we'll contact you soon. So I'm going to make a text field and I'll just put in a quick emoji and say something like submitted. We'll reach out ASAP, something like that. Now what I can do here as well is I can edit this and the visibility. And what I want here is an option that sees if the submit button is pressed. Okay. Now, the way that I did that is not only can this button send us an email when the form is submitted, but we can also have the button change a cell for us. So what we're going to do is change the target cell that this button affects. So when the button gets clicked, a different cell is going to change. So what cell do we want to change? Well, I want this submit pressed cell to change. I want this value to be true. So all this is saying is when that button gets pressed, change cell C15 to true. Okay. So it's normally by default as false in my spreadsheet. When someone clicks a button, it now becomes true. Now what we want to do is make sure that the visibility of this text block has the same status as our submit pressed. Okay. So it's going to be false until somebody clicks this button. All right. So let's take a look at this in action. If we have our spreadsheet here, someone can go through and they can, maybe they come in and they say they're starting with, let's say $100,000 and they're going to do a monthly contribution of, let's say $2,000. They want to look at 15 years as the time horizon with a rate of return of, let's say 6%. And they're like, this looks great. I can see how much money I put in, my contributions. You know, they're looking over this period of time. They want their own custom investment plan. So they put in their email address. Great. Now they see the submit button. As soon as they click submit, they'll now see submitted. We'll reach out as soon as possible. Now, I'll show you how to embed this into a website here in just a second. But first, I want to show you that the email that we get when someone submits this form. So what ends up happening is you get an email from GRID that shows you the data inputs and also a PDF of what the user is seeing. So what's great about this is I can see exactly the inputs that we put in here. And this is really great for inbound leads because you can see exactly what your clients were taking a look at. That way I could, see the email. Maybe if I ask for a phone number or ask for other details, it would be in here as well. So what I could really easily do here is email back this person and say, hey, I saw you're looking at, investing for 15 years. You're expecting a 6%. Let me tell you a little bit more about how we can help you achieve that in this market or whatever you do. So you get this PDF here that you can share with clients if you want to, or use it as a jumping off point for leads. Now, what I want to do from here is I want to embed this on my website, and it's super easy to do this. So what I'm going to do is click embed up here and enable embedding. So I have an embed link and an embed code. So an embed link would be useful if we were embedding this in something like Notion or Medium. So that could be helpful there. I want to embed this on my company website. So there are a couple options to do so. I do want to scale this embed to fit the screen. I want it to fit the content's full width. And I also want to embed this in the original state of the document, meaning what the data is in the underlying grid sheet. Okay. So one thing before I copy this embed is you probably want to set domain access, especially if you're using this if you're like selling any of these spreadsheets as a service, or if you're looking at, keeping this, it's like proprietary in some way to your company, and you don't want other people to be able to look at your source code, copy the embed, and put it on their website. If you don't want someone else to be able to use your spreadsheet on their website, set the domain access so only your domain can use it. So I'm just going to put in my website address. So what this does is it would make it so that no one can copy my embed code from my website and then go put it on their website. All right. So I'm going to add this domain. So it's a whitelisted. I'm going to copy the embed code. Now, I use Webflow. You might use any other website development tool, and it will work in that. All you need to be able to do is pull up some way to put in an embed code into your web page. So all I have to do is paste this in. On this web page, I just added in just some really quick margins around, so nothing crazy. I'm going to go ahead and publish this to my domain. And it's going to take us just a second here. So while it's doing that, something you can do is you can still add, a footer below here. You can add a header on top. You could even write a whole article and put in an embed code to your calculator for somebody to use it. Maybe you're writing an article on investing and you want to put in a quick investment calculator in a really easy way in the middle of your article that somebody could fill out a form and get connected with somebody on your team. That's a great way to do that. So I'll go ahead and open up my website here. And what we can see here is I'm on my website domain, and this is now embedded as a calculator. Okay. And you can see the background of my website is a slightly different color, and that's okay. If I was actually going to publish this on my website, I would change the color of the background. But now this is a fully interactive calculator people can use directly on your website. If they wanted to contact you, they could put in their information, submit it, get a confirmation that it was submitted, and that would now go to your team. It's super easy to take your data from Google Sheets or Excel, even Notion or Airtable, put your information in here and allow people to manipulate that data in a way that works well for their goals. Grid has completely changed the way that I do business and present information to my clients, and I think it can do the same for you. So go ahead and get started. There's a link down below to go ahead and sign up with a Grid account.